We often celebrate the rise of the wealthy. Their names flash across headlines, their faces appear in magazines, their stories told as tales of triumph. But beneath every fortune lies another story, a hidden cost, one that is rarely spoken of. Michael Hartmann was not born into privilege. He was not handed his empire. He fought for it, bled for it, and sacrificed pieces of himself that no amount of money could ever replace. To the world, Michael was a man chasing wealth, innovation, and influence. But behind the closed doors of a hospital room, away from the cameras and the noise, he was simply a father, broken, desperate, clinging to hope for the one life that mattered more than all the billions in the world. This is not the story of how Michael built his fortune. This is the story of what it cost him. This is the price of $1 billion. The hospital had become Michael Hartmann's second home. Its white walls, the faint smell of antiseptic, and the steady beep of machines had etched themselves into his memory as deeply as any business plan he had ever written. On the narrow bed lay his daughter Sophia, only 6 years old, too small, too fragile for the weight she carried. Her skin was pale, her lips dry, but her eyes, her beautiful brown eyes, still shone with innocence and trust. Michael sat close to her, his broad frame hunched forward, one hand clutching her tiny fingers as if letting go would mean losing her forever. His suit, once pressed and powerful, was wrinkled from nights spent on that same chair. His face bore the exhaustion of a man who had bargained with time and lost. "Daddy's here, my little sunshine," he whispered, forcing a smile through trembling lips. "I promise you, I'll make this right. You'll see the world, you'll run, you'll laugh. No more doctors, no more pain. Daddy will fix everything." But promises were fragile against the ticking of the machines. And Michael knew every hour he spent chasing investors, every meeting he took, was time stolen from this bedside. Yet without the money, without the empire he was trying to build, there would be no hope for Sophia at all. The world saw ambition, but here in this quiet room the truth was laid bare. Michael Hartmann was not fighting for wealth. He was fighting for his daughter's life. Every morning Michael left the hospital with a heavy heart. He walked past the endless rows of cars, past the people rushing to work, and each step felt like betrayal. His mind screamed that he should stay. Sophia needed him more than anyone. But another voice, cold and unrelenting, reminded him of reality. Treatment costs money, and money required sacrifice. Inside his leather briefcase were papers, contracts, and blueprints for an idea that investors had already dismissed as foolish. They said he was dreaming too big, aiming too high. But Michael knew he wasn't chasing wealth for himself. He was chasing time his daughter did not have. In the silence of his car, he often broke. His hand clutched the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, his jaw clenched as he fought back the tears. To the world, he was a man chasing success. To himself, he was a father gambling against death, using money as his only weapon. At night, Michael returned not to a home, but to a shell of one. His apartment was small, half empty, and littered with remnants of a life that once felt normal. Toys left in the corner, a picture frame of Sophia smiling. In better days, a blanket draped over the couch where he often collapsed without rest. The silence was unbearable. He turned on the lights, but they only illuminated the emptiness. Michael dropped his briefcase on the table, papers spilling across its surface, plans for a future he wasn't sure would ever come true. He poured himself a glass of water, staring at his own reflection in the dark window. The man staring back was not the ambitious entrepreneur the world imagined. He was a father haunted by the fear of losing everything that truly mattered. And in that lonely apartment, with the city lights flickering in the distance, Michael made himself another promise. No matter what it took, no matter how many nights he had to endure, he would find a way. For Sophia. Always for Sophia. Michael stood in a glass-walled office surrounded by men in tailored suits. His voice was steady, his presentation polished, but behind every word was desperation. He wasn't just selling an idea. He was begging for time, for belief, for a chance to save his daughter. The investors exchanged glances, unimpressed. One man leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes cold with skepticism. Another tapped his pen impatiently, as if Michael's dream was nothing more than wasted minutes. Inside, Michael felt himself breaking. He wanted to shout, to tell them this wasn't about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about a little girl fighting for her life in a sterile hospital bed. But he swallowed those words. If they knew his weakness, they'd only dismiss him further. So he pressed on, voice unwavering, hands gripping the edge of the table. He poured out his vision, his plan, his willpower, everything he had left. For Sophia. Always for Sophia. That night, after another rejection, Michael drove straight to the hospital instead of going home. The corridors were quiet, filled only with the hum of machines and the faint footsteps of nurses. When he entered Sophia's room, he found her asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with effort. Tubes and monitors surrounded her fragile body, yet she looked peaceful, unaware of the storm raging outside those walls. Michael sat beside her bed, holding her small hand gently in his own. The warmth of her fingers against his palm nearly undid him. His eyes blurred with tears he could no longer hold back. In that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The failed pitches, the cruel stares of investors, the mountain of debt, it all faded into silence. All that remained was a father and his daughter, bound together by love, by hope, and by the unbearable fear of running out of time. The next morning, Michael sat alone in a dim cafe, staring at his laptop screen. Numbers, charts, and unread emails filled his vision, but his mind was elsewhere, trapped in the quiet ticking of time running out. Every hour without money was another hour closer to losing Sophia. Then a message appeared, an invitation to join a new venture, one whispered about in circles he never thought he'd enter. The kind of deal that promised unthinkable returns but carried the weight of ruin if it failed. Michael's heart pounded as he read the details. It was reckless. It was dangerous. Yet in the shadows of his desperation, it looked like hope. He imagined Sophia's smile, the way her eyes lit up when she wasn't tethered to machines, the sound of her laugh when she was well. For her, he would risk it all, even if it meant standing at the edge of disaster. That evening, Michael returned to the hospital, but this time with a storm raging inside him. He stood by Sophia's bed, watching her chest rise and fall in fragile rhythm. He leaned closer, whispering words she could not hear. "I will save you no matter the cost, even if I must gamble everything. Even if I must carry the weight of failure on my shoulders, I will not let you go." His voice cracked, trembling with both fear and determination. In that small, sterile room, he made a vow not to God, not to the world, but to the little girl who meant more to him than life itself. And though the machines hummed indifferently and the walls remained silent, something inside Michael hardened. A father's love had transformed into resolve, and that resolve would lead him down a path from which there was no turning back. 2 nights later, Michael found himself walking into a private club hidden in the underbelly of the city. The air was heavy with cigar smoke, the murmur of powerful men, and the faint clink of glasses filled with expensive liquor. Here fortunes were made and destroyed in whispers. Every instinct told him he didn't belong. He was a desperate father, not a shark in a suit. But as he straightened his back and stepped deeper inside, he forced himself to wear the mask of ambition. For Sophia, he would become whoever he needed to be. A man with silver hair and sharp eyes greeted him, offering a seat at a round table where deals were struck like wagers at a casino. Papers, contracts, and numbers were laid out, but what Michael saw was something else entirely. A doorway, however dangerous, to the money that could save his daughter's life. And so, with a hand that trembled beneath the table, Michael signed his name into a world from which escape would be nearly impossible. That night, Michael sat alone in his car, the signed contract heavy in his briefcase. He stared at the city skyline, its towers gleaming like beacons of triumph. Yet all he felt was dread. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger eyes. Hollow face, tense, a man slipping further into a darkness he never thought he would enter. For the first time, he wondered, was he saving Sophia or was he damning them both? But when he closed his eyes, he saw her face, the softness of her smile, the sound of her small voice calling him Papa. That memory cut through the fog of fear like a blade. No risk, no sacrifice, no darkness could outweigh her life. So with trembling resolve, Michael gripped the steering wheel and whispered into the silence, "Whatever it takes, I'll pay the price." Days later, Michael logged into his account and froze. The numbers on the screen were unlike anything he had ever seen before. His risky investment had multiplied overnight. The impossible had happened. He had more money than he ever dared to imagine. For a moment, his chest filled with relief so powerful it nearly broke him. He could finally afford Sophia's treatment, the surgeries, the specialists from abroad. The dark weight pressing on him began to lift, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to breathe. He leaned back in his chair, hands trembling over his face, whispering through broken sobs, "We did it, Sophia, we did it." But even as he celebrated, a quiet dread lingered at the edges of his thoughts. This money had come with strings, and strings he knew always pulled back. The next day at the hospital, Michael walked into Sophia's room with flowers in hand. For the first time in weeks, he was smiling. He sat by her side, telling her stories about how soon they would travel, how she would see the ocean, How nothing could stop them now. Sophia, weak but awake, smiled faintly and squeezed his hand. That moment felt like salvation, like life itself had been given back to him. But as Michael leaned down to kiss her forehead, his phone buzzed. A message appeared. "We need to meet. Tonight you owe us now." The smile faded from his lips, replaced by a cold weight in his chest. The cost of his newfound wealth was already knocking at his door. And this time it wasn't just about money. That night Michael drove to a warehouse at the edge of the city. The directions had been precise, the tone of the message unforgiving. His heart pounded against his chest as his headlights cut through the mist, revealing a structure of rusted steel and broken windows. Inside, the air was damp and cold. A single hanging bulb cast weak light over a table where 3 men waited. Their suits were sharp, but their eyes were sharper predators in human skin. Michael stepped forward, trying to mask the fear gnawing at his bones. He told himself he wasn't here as a victim. He was here as a father. But the moment he saw the contracts on the table, thick with clauses and fine print, he realized the truth. He had not bought freedom with his money, he had purchased chains. One of the men leaned forward, his voice smooth but laced with poison. "You've tasted success, Mr. Hartmann, but don't mistake this for a gift. It's an agreement, and agreements have consequences." Michael's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to shout that he had already risked everything. But the man's cold eyes silenced him. Another slid a folder across the table, pages filled with demands. Investments to funnel favors, to deliver debts that went beyond numbers. As Michael stared down at the papers, his chest hollowed with dread. He had saved Sophia's life, but in doing so, he had tied himself to men who could end his own. In the dim warehouse, surrounded by silence and smoke, Michael realized that the true price of his billion had only just begun. Michael drove home with the folder resting like a curse on the seat beside him. The city lights blurred past, but he barely saw them. His mind was spinning, replaying every word spoken in that warehouse. At home, he poured himself a glass of water, but his hands shook so violently the glass slipped, shattering against the floor. He sank into a chair, face buried in his palms. For months he had lived in fear of losing Sophia. Now a new fear clawed at him. What if saving her meant destroying himself? The walls of his apartment felt closer, suffocating, as if pressing in to remind him there was no escape. The wealth he once prayed for had arrived, but it came wrapped in chains of iron. And yet deep inside, one thought cut through the despair like a burning flame. "She's alive. She's alive. Whatever it costs, I will endure it." The following morning, Michael returned to the hospital. The moment he stepped into Sophia's room and saw her smile, fragile yet radiant, every shadow lifted for just an instant. She whispered "Papa" and reached for his hand. Tears filled his eyes as he knelt beside her, kissing her tiny fingers. This was why he had risked everything. This was the reason he would walk through fire, through ruin, through the grip of men who saw him as nothing more than a pawn. He smiled at her, but behind that smile was a truth he could never share. She would live because he had sold his freedom. In that sterile room, surrounded by machines and sunlight, Michael understood fully. The price of $1 billion was not measured in dollars, nor in contracts, nor in power. It was measured in chains wrapped tightly around his soul. And now there was no turning back. The world saw only numbers. They saw Michael Hartmann as a rising force, a man who dared to grasp opportunity where others faltered. But what the world did not see, what they could never understand, was the storm raging within him. Every smile he gave his daughter was built on lies he told himself. Every laugh he coaxed from her came at the cost of another chain, binding him tighter to men who thrived in shadows. He had saved Sophia, yes, but at what cost? His wealth was not freedom. His billion was not victory. It was a prison crafted from contracts and whispers, guarded by predators who demanded obedience. As Michael stood by the hospital window that evening, the golden sun casting light across his weary face, one truth echoed louder than all others. He was no longer just a father. He was a man owned by a deal he could never escape. And though Sophia's heartbeat gave him strength, the question lingered in the silence of that room. How much more will the price of $1 billion demand?